Completing the square. Our first example is x squared plus 12x minus 2 equals 0. And we're going to solve this quadratic equation by completing the square. So our first step is if a does not equal 1, divide the entire equation by a. In our case, a does equal 1, so we do not need to do this division. Step 2. Keep the terms with the x's on the left-hand side and move the constant to the right-hand side. Remember, when you move the 2 to the right-hand side, it changes signs. So now it's positive 2. Step 3. Take the number in front of the x, its coefficient, divide it by 2, and square it. Add this number to both sides. So I'm taking 12 divided by 2 squared and adding it to both sides. In other words, I'm adding 36 to both sides here because 12 divided by 2 is 6. 6 squared is 36. Step 4. The left-hand side will now be a perfect square. Factor the left-hand side and simplify the right-hand side. So the left-hand side will always factor as a perfect square trinomial. You would put your parentheses down, you take the square root of x squared, put the x, take the square root of 36, put the 6. The sign of the middle term is positive, so it's plus. So x plus 6 quantity squared, and then 2 plus 36 gives us 8. Then solve by taking the square root of both sides, if possible, and simplify. Okay, so taking the square root, the left-hand side I have x plus 6. The right-hand side I will have plus or minus the square root of 38. Please don't forget the plus or minus. And then solve for x, get the x by itself. Subtract 6 from both sides. Usually I'll keep this constant in front of the radical. So x is equal to negative 6 plus or minus the square root of 38. If it's possible to simplify the radical, please do, but square root of 38 does not simplify. So that's our answer. Then remember, if the number under the radical is negative, there is no real solution. There will be instead two complex solutions. Our second example, x squared minus 4x plus 1 equals 0. Okay, move the 1 to the right-hand side. So x squared minus 4x equals negative 1. I always leave this space so I could fill it in with what I'm adding to both sides. Then I'm taking negative 4 divided by 2, squaring it, adding that to both sides. Negative 4 divided by 2 is negative 2. That squared is positive 4. So I have x squared minus 4x plus 4 equals negative 1 plus 4. Remember, this left-hand side is now a perfect square, so I put the parentheses squared, square root of x squared is x, square root of 4 is 2, takes the sign of the middle term, so I've got my minus. And then my right-hand side, I have negative 1 plus 4 is 3. Take the square root of both sides. X minus 2 equals plus or minus the square root of 3. Get x by itself, so add 2 to both sides. X equals 2 plus or minus radical 3. Okay, x squared plus 11x plus 3 equals 0. Move the 3 to the right-hand side, it becomes negative 3. Now I'm adding 11 divided by 2 squared to both sides, and I'm going to keep it as fractions. So 11 squared plus x squared plus 11x plus 121 over 4 equals negative 3 plus 121 over 4. Okay, the left-hand side still is a perfect square, so I have my parentheses, square root of x squared. Remember, I still have my squared outside. The square root of 121 over 4 is 11 halves. Takes the sign of the middle term. And then my right-hand side, okay, the negative 3 becomes a negative 12 over 4 to get a common denominator. Add this to 121 fourths. So I have x plus 11 halves squared equals 109 fourths. Take the square root of both sides. X plus 11 halves equals plus or minus the square root of 109 over 2. I took the square root of 4, which is why the radical only covers the 109 now, and why my denominator is now 2. Solve for x by subtracting 11 halves from both sides. X is equal to negative 11 halves plus or minus the square root of 109 over 2. So finally, let's look at an example where we do have an a that is not equal to 1. So remember, we will divide everything in the equation by 4 right now. So I have x squared minus 2 fourths x minus 5 fourths equals 0. I can change this and simplify it to minus 1/2 x. Okay, move the 5 fourths to the right-hand side where it becomes positive. So I have x squared minus 1/2 x equals 5 fourths. Take the negative 1/2, divide it by 2 and square it and add it to both sides. That's negative 1/4, which gets squared. If you're not sure where that came from, take the negative 1/2, divide it by 2. It's the same as negative 1/2 divided by 2 written this way. Negative 1/2 times 1/2, because remember, when you're dividing by fractions, change the divide to multiply and take the reciprocal of the second number. And when you multiply that, you get negative 1/4, so that's where the negative 1/4 came from. And we're adding this to the right-hand side as well. The left-hand side will factor shortly, so right now I've got x squared minus 1/2 x plus 1/16 equals 5 fourths plus 1/16. Okay, so now put our parentheses with the squared, square root of the x squared, square root of 1/16 gets the symbol from the sign of the middle number. So x minus 1/4 squared equals, okay, common denominator will be 16, so 5 fourths becomes 20/16 plus 1/16, or x minus 1/4 squared equals 21/16. Take the square root of both sides. X minus 1/4 equals plus or minus the square root of 21 over 4. Notice again the radical is only over the 21 because I took the square root of 16, which is why you see a denominator of 4. Add 1/4 to both sides. X equals 1/4 plus or minus the square root of 21 over 4.